There is a document attributed to Pontius Pilate that, surprisingly, is said to have been sent to the Roman Emperor Tiberius. In it, we find detailed descriptions of Jesus' appearance, including physical traits that are not explicitly detailed in the Gospels. Furthermore, this text mentions accounts of Christ's miracles, his trial, his crucifixion, and even his resurrection. But did Pilate really report to the emperor the news of the resurrection of the Son of God, even describing aspects of his physical appearance? What makes this possible correspondence so intriguing is the way in which Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, is said to have recorded personal observations about Jesus. It is an outsider's perspective on the Jewish community, providing commentary on his deeds and characteristics, something that has sparked the curiosity of researchers for centuries. Although the authenticity of this letter is debated among historians, its content raises reflections on the political and religious context of the time. According to the account, Pilate begins his message with a formal greeting to Emperor Tiberius, demonstrating the respect and hierarchy typical of the Roman Empire. He then proceeds to outline the points that caught his attention during his governance of the province, highlighting Jesus' behavior and rumors of supernatural events related to him. He begins the letter as follows: "Greetings, Your Majesty. I feel compelled to urgently share some extraordinary events that have been occurring in my province, for I sense that they may shape the future of our nation. It is as if the gods have withdrawn from us. Ever since I assumed the governorship of Judea, my life has been marked by constant concerns and unease. Shortly after my arrival in Jerusalem, I settled in the pretorium and prepared a grand banquet to welcome local authorities, such as a tetrarch from Galilee and the high priest, along with some of his officials. However, none of them appeared at the scheduled time. I interpreted this absence as a sign of disrespect towards the Roman government and my position. A few days later, I received a visit from the high priest, who claimed that he could not sit at the table with Romans because of his religious traditions. Yet, his gaze betrayed a hostile attitude toward our authority. Although I pretended to accept his explanation, it was clear that he and his followers were not sympathetic to Rome. I therefore advised that vigilance be maintained regarding these religious leaders, as they might act against us in exchange for power or personal advantages. Among all the cities under our control, Jerusalem proves to be the most challenging to manage. The people are notoriously rebellious, and I fear a revolt at any moment. My military resources are limited. I have only a centurion and about 100 men. When I requested more soldiers from the governor of Syria, I was informed that he too lacks the forces needed to protect his own province. I fear that our empire is expanding faster than we can defend it, which may further weaken our position. Despite keeping a certain distance from the populace, I attempted to understand their motivations and attitudes. It was in this context that a rumor caught my attention. It was said that a young man in Galilee was teaching a new doctrine in the name of a God who, they claimed, had sent him from time immemorial. At first, I suspected rebellion. However, after careful observation, I concluded that he was not an instigator of revolts, but rather a man named Jesus of Nazareth, who appeared to have more respect for the Romans than for the Jewish people. On one occasion, I saw a crowd gathered around a young man speaking with calm and simplicity, leaning against a tree in the square. I was told that this was Jesus. I quickly noticed the contrast between his serene demeanor and the intense curiosity of those listening. I did not wish to interrupt, but I asked my secretary, Manios, to blend into the crowd to record what Jesus was saying. My secretary is the grandson of an ancient conspirator who once awaited Catiline in Etruria, which granted him some experience in political affairs. He also is proficient in Hebrew and has my full trust. Upon his return, Manios reported that he had never seen so much wisdom in anyone speaking to the people in such an accessible manner. One of the rebels present asked Jesus if it was right to pay taxes to Caesar. The response was objective and impressive. "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's." These words led me to believe that Jesus was not a threat, but someone whose teachings could maintain order. Therefore, I did not interfere with his gatherings with the people or with the selection of his disciples. However, there is an unease in my spirit. If at some point the religion of our ancestors is replaced by these new teachings, all the tolerance I am currently showing could, paradoxically, contribute to a future fall of Rome. Should this occur, I will have, even unwillingly, played my part in what the Jews call providence, and we call destiny. I place these observations at your disposal, Your Majesty, so that you may carefully evaluate the situation in Judea. It is a delicate moment, and I ask that you seriously consider this information when making decisions regarding our policy in the region. The freedom I had allowed Jesus to speak openly began to unsettle the wealthiest and most powerful Jews. He spared no criticism of the religious leaders, calling scribes and Pharisees snakes and comparing them to tombs that were beautiful on the outside but full of decay on the inside. In his messages, he emphasized that humility was worth more to God than any social prestige, which further displeased the local authorities. Practically every day, I received complaints at the pretorium about Jesus' audacity. Some warned that in Jerusalem, prophets were stoned mercilessly. I was preparing an appeal to Caesar, but I learned that the Senate supported my actions and would send reinforcements. Faced with the possibility of a revolt and few soldiers available, I opted for a strategy to restore calm without submitting to the interests of the local leaders. I sent a letter to Jesus, inviting him to come to the pretorium so we could talk. He accepted graciously. Being of Spanish and Roman origin, I'm not easily impressed, but upon seeing him on the balcony, I felt a tremor throughout my body, as if a greater force was anchoring me to the ground. He remained calm, seeming to say with his gaze, "I am here, ready to listen." For a few moments, I merely observed him, admiring a presence that surpassed any sculpture of gods or heroes from our culture. I spoke in a trembling voice, recalling that for 3 years I had allowed him to speak freely, without regrets. In my view, his words went beyond what any Greek philosopher had ever written, although I was not sure if he was acquainted with Socrates or Plato. Nevertheless, I warned him that this freedom had earned him powerful enemies, just as Socrates had gathered opponents in Athens. Among those who felt offended by the harshness of his speeches, some accused me of complicity in the aim of subverting the fragile power of the Jews. I explained to Jesus that my advice, and not an order, was to moderate his words so that those who did not understand him would not turn against him and, consequently, force me to enforce the Roman laws strictly. Calmly, Jesus replied that my words did not come from true wisdom, comparing them to the attempt to make waters stand still in the middle of a valley. In his view, only God fully controls the course of events. He then spoke of a time when the blood of the righteous would be shed before the rose of Sarum bloomed, suggesting an imminent tragedy. Deeply moved, I hurried to assure him that I considered him more valuable than the rebellious Pharisees, who abused Rome's tolerance and led the people to believe that Caesar was a tyrant. I assured Jesus that, under my command, the pretorium would be his refuge, protected from the hostility of those religious leaders. In this way, I made it clear that he would have me as an ally whenever he needed shelter. Jesus remained calm, slightly bowed his head, and, with a tranquil smile, replied, "When the time comes, there will be no refuge for the Son of Man, neither on earth nor underground. True refuge is in the heavens." He pointed upward and concluded, mentioning the prophets. "What was foretold will be fulfilled." Worried, I retorted, "Do not force me to turn my request into an order. The peace of this province is my responsibility, and therefore I ask that you be prudent in your speech. Do not ignore this warning, for you well know the consequences. May happiness be with you. Farewell, Prince of the Earth." Unruffled, Jesus answered, "I did not come to bring intrigues, but peace, love, and compassion. I was born on the same day that Augustus Caesar brought peace to the empire, and my trials do not come from me, but will come from others, according to the will of my Father. He is the one who guides my path." Finally, I recommended that he control his words a bit, for even I could not spare him from the full fury of the crowds. When Jesus departed, I had the strange impression of seeing a light fading on the horizon. A relief overcame me, as if his penetrating gaze carried too much weight for me to bear. As time passed, Herod, already in advanced age, joined those who sought vengeance against Jesus. If it were up to him, the execution might have occurred immediately. However, despite taking pride in his title and origin, Herod had concerns similar to mine. He feared provoking the anger of the Senate and, deep down, perhaps also feared the calm and mysterious figure of Jesus, although no Roman official likes to admit fear in the face of a Jew. On one occasion, Herod came to the pretorium for a courtesy visit. After a few words of little importance, he asked what I thought of the Nazarene. I replied that, to me, Jesus resembled a great philosopher, whose teachings did not threaten Roman politics, and therefore he was allowed to speak freely. Herod laughed ironically and, with a brief bow, took his leave. It was not long before the time of Passover, the great Jewish festival, arrived. The streets of Jerusalem were teeming with devotees coming from various regions, all swept up in a fervent religious agitation. In that fervor, voices arose calling for Jesus' death, and I discovered that even the temple treasury was being used to bribe people, inciting them against him. My network of informants confirmed that the risk was real. I sent a centurion with 100 infantry soldiers and 100 cavalrymen to calm the situation, but the officer himself refused to carry out the mission, leaving me virtually helpless. Thus, I remained isolated in a hostile city, relying only on a few veterans by my side while fervent crowds repeatedly shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" During this period, 3 powerful groups united against Jesus: the Herodians, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees. Some had a dual motive. They wanted to rid themselves of the Nazarene and, at the same time, resented Roman domination. They even harbored rancor towards me for entering the city with standards bearing the image of the emperor, which they considered an inexcusable sacrilege. Furthermore, there was the financial issue. I had suggested using part of the temple treasury for public works, which angered both the Pharisees and the more conservative leaders. To them, this proposal reinforced my lack of respect for local customs, and as if that were not enough, they were also filled with hatred for the forceful criticisms Jesus made wherever he went, challenging their rules and questioning their style of leadership. Thus, the fate of the Nazarene became increasingly uncertain, while I struggled to maintain order and protect what remained of Roman authority in Jerusalem. I was not only dealing with those power groups, but also with a disordered and impulsive populace that, at any sign of revolt, would plunge into chaos, ready to take advantage of the disorder. When Jesus was presented to the high priest, the death sentence was decreed against him. It then fell to Caiaphas, the religious leader, to reinforce the condemnation and ensure that the execution took place. At that moment, I asserted that since Jesus was from Galilee, Herod should judge him. I then sent him to the presence of Herod, who, feigning deference to the representative of Caesar, returned the prisoner to me, washing his hands of any responsibility. As a result, my palace soon filled with indignant people, and in a short time, multitudes from all over Judea, especially from the mountains of Nazareth, seemed to converge on Jerusalem. The atmosphere was so tense that even a soothsayer named Gausa knelt before me in tears, pleading that I not touch a man whom she considered holy and capable of performing supernatural feats. While the crowd gathered in the corridors and staircases, they brought Jesus back. I went to the court of justice, escorted by my guards, and asked the people what they wished to do with him. They shouted that they wanted his death. I questioned what Jesus' crime was, and they alleged blasphemy, claiming that he had prophesied the destruction of the temple and declared himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews. I explained that under Roman law, those accusations did not warrant a death sentence, but the cries of "Crucify him" only grew louder. To try to save him, I resorted to the custom of releasing a prisoner during Passover. I suggested that we release Jesus, but the crowd persisted in demanding his crucifixion. I also pointed out that, under Jewish law, no death sentence could be carried out on the same day it was decreed. The Sanhedrin would have to fast, review the case the following day, and collect signatures, while a man at the door would announce the accused's name, the crime, and the witnesses, allowing for any evidence in favor of the defendant. However, every attempt I made to appeal to reason only resulted in even more furious shouts. With no alternative, I requested water, washed my hands before them, and declared that I found no reason to condemn Jesus. However, the popular outcry stifled any argumentation. I had never witnessed such tumult. The city seemed taken over by a chaotic force, sweeping the crowd in waves from the pretorium to Mount Zion. It was an uncontrolled clamor, far worse than the riots I had seen in Pannonia or in the Forum itself. And amidst all that fury, the only one maintaining serenity was Jesus, whose calmness contrasted with the rage of everyone around him. The afternoon gradually sank into an unusual darkness, reminding me of the Ides of March and the death of Julius Caesar. There I was, governor of an uneasy province, leaning in a corner of the basilica, witnessing what seemed more a divine act than a human one. The Nazarene, an innocent man, was being led to execution. Everything around me was deserted, as the population of Jerusalem had hurriedly departed through the funeral door toward Jamnia, leaving behind an atmosphere heavy with sorrow. It was as if my faith were bound to Calvary, while the centurion struggled to contain the tumult. I felt completely alone. There was a silent anguish in my heart, warning me that we were witnessing something far beyond a mere political issue. The moans and cries emanating from Golgotha, carried by the wind, seemed to herald a pain that surpassed what the human ear could endure. Dark clouds hovered over the temple and spread throughout the city like a somber cloak. Some accounts claim that in the face of the signs that appeared in the sky and on earth, Dionysius, the patriarch, had declared, "Either the Creator suffers, or the universe is collapsing." While these strange events were unfolding, I heard that a terrifying earthquake shook Lower Egypt, causing panic among the superstitious. A learned Jew from Antioch, known as Balthazar, a personal friend of the Nazarene, was found dead after the tremor. It was unclear whether he died from fear or from the pain of his loss. Early in the evening, I wrapped myself in my cloak and descended into the city, making my way near Golgotha. The sacrifice had been completed. People were returning home visibly shaken, as if they still could not believe what they had witnessed. I watched my small Roman retinue pass by in silence, and I noticed that the standard bearing the eagle was draped in mourning. Some Jewish soldiers were murmuring things I did not understand, while others whispered about miracles, interpreting them as manifestations of their gods. In several places, groups of men and women paused to look again in the direction of Calvary, as if awaiting some new divine sign. I returned to the pretorium, climbing stairs stained with the blood of the Nazarene. There, I found an elderly gentleman kneeling, surrounded by Romans who were crying. He approached and said with a deep lament, "A man with white hair crying is something that breaks the heart." My own sorrow deepened. I wept with him, and I had the feeling that everyone around us was on the verge of tears. Those who had denounced or abandoned Jesus had vanished like cowards, while the few remaining were overwhelmed with the pain of what they had witnessed. There were rumors that some had tried to wash their mouths with vinegar in reference to the Nazarene's words about resurrection and the separation of the dead. I could not confirm it, but the city was rife with gossip. Once I regained some composure, I asked the elderly man, "Father, who are you and what do you desire?" He replied, "I am Joseph of Arimathea, and I come to beg you to allow me to bury the body of Jesus of Nazareth." I agreed, releasing some soldiers to accompany him, as I feared they might desecrate the body. However, a few days later, news emerged that the tomb was empty, and Jesus' disciples were proclaiming that he had risen, exactly as he had foretold. This news caused an uproar even greater than his death. I cannot say with certainty what happened. I investigated as much as I could. If I made any error in judgment, I leave it to each to decide. They told me that Joseph placed Jesus in his own tomb, but if he already expected the resurrection, I could not say. The day after the burial, one of the priests came in a state of panic to the pretorium, fearing that the disciples might remove the body to claim that he had come back to life. I sent him to Captain Marcos, ordering him to assign as many Jewish soldiers as necessary to guard the tomb. In this way, if anything were to occur, the responsibility would not fall upon us, the Romans. When the news spread that the tomb was empty, my distress grew. I sought out Captain Marcos, who confirmed that he had assigned his Lieutenant Benam and 100 men to guard the site. And even today, the rumors that Jesus has risen continue to multiply, leaving the populace divided between belief in what they saw and fear of reprisals. The fact is, no measure I took was sufficient to contain the consequences of this mystery that, even now, remains beyond my understanding. After the resurrection of the Nazarene, many rumors circulated about what had happened in the early morning when the tomb was found empty. I ordered that Esam, one of those responsible for the guard that night, be called to provide his personal account. He recounted that, near the fourth watch, he noticed a soft, brilliant light approaching the sepulchre. At first, he thought it was women bringing ointments, but he could not understand how they could have passed by the guard unnoticed. While he was reflecting, the surrounding environment was taken over by an intense radiance, as if several figures wrapped in white cloths had appeared, displaying joy and singing praises. His psalm described a gentle and celestial melody, the most beautiful he had ever heard. Then the earth began to tremble with such force that he could not remain standing, and he eventually fainted. When he regained consciousness, he was lying face down on the ground. In trying to orient himself, he realized that it was still dark around him, far too early for dawn. He denied that it had been merely dizziness from rising too quickly, for he had not even slept on duty. Sleeping on the job meant a risk of death. According to Isam, some soldiers were asleep, but he remained alert. He estimated that this strange light lasted for almost an hour, although he did not have the courage to approach the tomb immediately upon regaining consciousness. Isam also reported that the priests interrogated him, asking him to claim that it had all been just an earthquake. They even offered money for him to say that the disciples had stolen the body while the guards slept. However, he did not see any follower of Jesus at the scene, and only learned of the body's disappearance when others informed him. When questioned about the priest's beliefs, he said that some considered Jesus to be an extraordinary being, perhaps not an ordinary man, but someone who had been on earth in past eras, such as in the times of Abraham and Lot, making his supernatural deeds plausible. These speculations seem coherent with what is known of his life. Many, whether allies or not, confirm that he demonstrated mastery over the elements, turning water into wine, curing severe illnesses, resurrecting people, calming storms, and even finding fish with coins in their mouths. Paradoxically, it was these signs that aroused the enmity of several leaders. After all, there is no record of him having committed any crime or real harm to the law. Instead, his actions became known to all, fueling both the love of those who believed in him and the hatred of those who opposed him. I reflect on the words of the one who was by Jesus' side during the crucifixion, exclaiming, "Indeed, this was the Son of God." And, recalling Pontius Pilate's own account, I note that he saw in the Nazarene a man of noble bearing, a compassionate look, and a presence that inspired tranquility. Jesus' face was described as harmonious, with an expression of kindness that drew attention wherever he went. He had softly wavy hair, in a shade between light brown and blonde, and deep eyes whose colors varied between light brown and blue depending on the light. His skin, though exposed to outdoor labor, maintained a healthy appearance, and his well-groomed beard accentuated his dignity. The simple attire he wore, consisting of a cloak and a tunic, reflected his detachment from luxury and his desire to be close to the humblest. Everything about him exuded serenity, from his calm voice to the gaze that seemed to understand the essence of everyone who approached. It was this aura of peace that touched both the Romans and the Jews, arousing curiosity in some and reverence in others. Now, my noble sovereign, I have described all the details I could recall, so that my stance can be fairly evaluated. I'm aware of all the criticisms leveled against me, but I present this account with loyalty and respect. I will continue to fulfill my duty, always as your obedient servant. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel now.